Fellowship information session. I'm Peter Lovell, I'm Director of the NIHR Research Design Service in London, and I'll be chairing the session today. Just got a brief introduction to go through, and those slides in full screen. What are we aiming to achieve today? We're going to be sharing information with you through a series of short talks. We'll start with an overview from the NIHR Academy on the funding opportunities, and today we're focusing on the pre-doc and the doctoral schemes. And just to let you know, tomorrow we have a further event which will cover the postdoc, so the Advanced and the Development Skills Enhancement Award. So that's an event tomorrow. We'll have two previously successful applicants sharing their experiences of applying for a fellowship application. We'll have insights from a panel member, and we'll also be describing the support that NIHR can give to fellowship applicants. Following the talks, we're going to have a Q&A session with all of today's speakers. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We'll be recording all of today's talks. Please can we ask that you keep your microphones on mute through the presentations. And any questions you have, very happy for you to put those either in the chat or to raise your hand. So here's the rundown of today's talks. We're expecting just to run straight through and finish by about 1 o'clock. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, and I'm now going to hand over to Elizabeth Taylor. Liz is the Senior Programme Manager at the Academy in the Personal Awards team. Liz, over to you then to tell us a bit about the pre-doc and the doctoral schemes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's full screen.
Just trying to get my presenter. Do it. I don't know if I can get presenter view up on here. I'll have to run with it, it should be fine. So, good morning, everybody. Oh, right there.
Liz, do you want me to share them for you? And then you can read your notes.
Can do, if that makes sense. If that's all right. I'm struggling with the.
Just give me a couple of minutes.
Flip it. Just having. I thought it would work, but.
That's all right. I'll just share them for you. Just give me a sec.
Yeah, that'd be great if that's all right.
That's right. You might also be able to take over presenting from me, but let's see how we go.
Yeah. As I say, I don't use Teams.
Right, there we go. Can everyone see those?
Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Let's have to do the Christmas. Next slide, please, on me.
Yeah, no worries. Right. Thank you, appreciated. Super duper. So, yeah, good afternoon, good morning. God, I'm having a right mare, aren't I? So, yeah, good morning, everybody. So, I'm Liz Taylor, Senior Programme Manager at the NIHR Academy. And as Peter's already described, I'm going to be giving you a bit of a rundown today on the pre-doctoral and the doctoral fellowship awards that we run. So you can see there on the slide that I'll just be giving you a brief overview about the Academy and our remit, and then our programmes, but as we mentioned, specifically digging down a bit deeper on the pre-doctoral fellowship schemes. So we have 3 of those which are listed in the red there, and the doctoral fellowship schemes, again, another 3 listed there. Kind of giving you a bit of a rundown around the application and assessment process to finish off, and then there's a few links at the bottom that kind of goes through support and contact. So kind of after the session, if you've got any kind of further questions, you'll know where to find us. So you can go next slide, please. So a little bit about the NIHR itself. So we're the nation's largest funder of health and care research, and we have an annual budget of up to £1 billion per year. And our mission is to improve the health and the wealth of the nation through research. So you go next slide, please. And we are committed to funding health, public health and social care research to improve outcomes for the patients and the public. And it's primarily in the top right-hand corner there. So we attract, train and support the best researchers to tackle health, complex health and care challenges of the future. And that's what we at the Academy intend to do. So we are there to train and support you guys who want to improve health and social care outcomes moving forwards. You go next slide, please. So specifically, the Academy helps to coordinate NIHR academic training, managing national and training and career competitions, and we invest in future research leaders and their careers, and we provide clear pathways for healthcare professionals from a wide range of different backgrounds, so clinical academics, non-clinical scientists, doctors, dentists, nurses, kind of the whole range of health and social care professionals in trying to support and conduct that leading edge research moving forwards. And in doing so, we're hoping to build capacity and capability to respond to these other health, these important health and social care challenges that are currently emerging both now and in the future. So next slide, please. So I've included a slide on here about our remit. So before I kind of go down into the nitty-gritty in terms of what the programmes are, I thought it'd be really good to kind of just hone in a bit on the remit for our personal awards. So any application that you submit to either the pre-doctoral schemes or the doctoral schemes must meet our remit. So we do an assessment once we receive all the applications, and this is what we use to assess whether the research proposed is kind of compatible with what we'll fund. So the full statement is actually all on the NIHR website, and I think I provided the link at the end of the presentation that will show that. But essentially, some of the key points to take away from this here is that we don't support any basic research or work involving animals and their tissue. The overall remit is early translational, clinical and applied health research, but at the doctoral level, which will be key kind of for any doctoral applications, is that at this level, we do not fund that early translational work. So any kind of early translational work at the doctoral level is funded through other NIHR infrastructure. Also, another thing to bear in mind is to do with biomarkers. So some of the most common applications which we kick out for remit is that they're investigating a lot of novel biomarker work, and that kind of research is too mechanistic in focus. So we want it to be applied health and social care research that does move forward in benefiting the patients and the public. So some of the earlier work, as I mentioned, is probably more suited to the NIHR infrastructure. If you go next slide, please. So these are all, I say all, it does need updating now because we've got a lot more schemes kind of moving forwards, especially kind of we're looking to target students as well. So this slide does need updating kind of on the back of some of the increased funding that we've now received and the new schemes that we're launching. But essentially today we're going to be looking, as I mentioned, at the 6 pre-doctoral and doctoral schemes. So if you can just click on the next slide, a circle should come up. But as you can notice there, we fund a lot of research from across the your careers essentially. So we'll start all the way from pre-doctoral all the way up to chair. So there is something for everybody here at the NIHR. So initially, I'm going to be talking about our pre-doctoral schemes. So if you go next slide, please. And next slide again for me, Catherine, thank you. So we have 3 doctoral level schemes here at the NIHR Academy. So we have our pre-doctoral scheme, which is targeted for developing methodologists. We have our PCAF scheme, which is the pre-doctoral clinical clinical academic fellowship scheme, which is for NIHR registered health or social care professionals. And we have our PLAF scheme, which is those that work in local authority. So it's really essential kind of knowing which one of these schemes is kind of most suited to your current profession and your intentions kind of moving forwards within your career. So I'm going to take you through them one by one. So we will start now with the pre-doctoral fellowship. So this fellowship is designed to support those at an early career stage looking to develop a career in research methods. So this scheme offers you the opportunity to undertake a master's level or a full master's level training programme. So we have a lot of individuals for this scheme that do incorporate full master's degrees into their training development programme. And the intention with this scheme is to develop individuals that want to go into a career within health research methodology. So the methodology is covered there at the bottom, you can see. So we're looking to develop individuals who want to work in medical statistics, clinical trial design, health economics, modelling, mixed methods, epidemiology. So that is the intention there, that you're going to be kind of the helping us in terms of kind of working with the methods moving forwards for people's research. So if you can go next slide, please. So to be eligible for this scheme, you should have completed a first degree. So we have individuals that come straight out from undergraduate level kind of applying to this scheme. You must be at a proposed institution which is based in England, so either a HEI, NHS or other provider of health and social care services. And most importantly, you are wanting to develop a career as a methodologist. So the funding which we offer will pay for your salary, training development fees up to £5,000, conference costs, supervision fees, master's fees if they're applicable. And there's also the option to either undertake this on a 12, 18 or 24-month basis. And we also are really flexible in terms of the WTE options as well. So you can either undertake it on a full-time or part-time basis, depending on kind of what you currently do. And this launches annually in January of each year. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about the PCAF. So as I mentioned, the pre-doctoral clinical and practitioner academic fellowship. It's a bit of a mouthful to say. So this one is open for health and social care professionals that are not doctors or dentists. So just to make this clear, this is not open to any doctors or dentists who want to develop and continue practicing their professional development within a research leadership as well. So to be eligible for this scheme, you need to be registered with one of the NIHR regulatory bodies. I think there's a slide after this which will kind of go through those in a second. You must not have completed a PhD already, and you should have the intention of working within the current profession that you hold the required registration in over the course of the fellowship. For this scheme, there are charity partnerships available, and there's a slide at the end which I'll kind of go through very briefly in terms of what this means. And for the PCAF, there are 2 distinct levels of support available. So if we kind of go to the next slide, which I think is the regulatory bodies. So as I mentioned, you need to be registered with one of these regulatory bodies on here. If you think that you're working in an NIHR eligible profession and it's not listed on this slide, then do get in contact with us and we can kind of double check that you would be eligible to apply for the scheme. So as I mentioned, if you go to the next slide, please, there's the standard PCAF, which is for applicants that need the time to develop a doctoral to gain the skills to be competitive at doctoral fellowship level, and you kind of have the time in this scheme to undertake a comprehensive programme of academic training at master's level. Within this fellowship, you also have the time to develop your doctoral fellowship application as well. And this can be taken full-time either over 12 months or part-time over a 24 or 30-month period, again at the flexible WT options that are on the screen there. And as per the pre-doc, we'll fund your salary costs for the time undertaking the fellowship, your master's level training costs, conference fees, and supervision and mentorship costs as well. We then have another option available, if you go to the next slide, which is the PCAF bridge. And this is for applicants that may already have that bit of academic training already kind of under their belt and have that a bit of prior research experience necessary. But they kind of, you need that bit more time to be able to kind of put forward a competitive doctoral fellowship application, and this is what the PCAF bridge can offer you. So as you can see on the slide there, it's at a slightly lesser duration, so it's undertaken part-time on either a 6 to 12-month basis, and again salary costs, courses, conference fees, and supervision and mentorship costs are funded, but at lesser amounts, because the expectation is you don't need as much time with this fellowship in order to kind of move forward into a doctoral fellowship application. So next we'll move on to the PLAF, so the NIHR Doctoral Local Authority Academic Fellowship. So this was piloted in 2021, and as the LAF scheme in general is kind of expanded now, so we have opportunities for those that work in local authority settings, based at both doctoral level and at the postdoctoral level now. So kind of the PLAF was a bit of the trailblazer for the LAF scheme, which is, it's been fantastically successful. And this kind of hones in on those individuals that work within local authorities or local authority supporting services as well. And it's there again, similar to the PCAF in its structure, in order to ensure that you gain the skills and the knowledge and the training to be competitive for further PhD study. So the slight difference here is the contract of employment is required from a local authority to be eligible for this scheme, or you're a provider of local authority commission services or a non-profit organisation that provides a service on behalf of a local authority. Again, not registered for the dental, the GDC or the GMC, have not registered or completed a PhD, and again, you're wanting to work within that area that you're currently working over the duration of the fellowship. So I haven't gone into I won't kind of break it down with the PLAF, the standard PLAF and the PLAF bridge, because it's very similar, if not the same as the PCAF that I've just described. And again, charity partnerships are available, and this does launch in January of each year. So we'll move on now to the doctoral fellowship schemes. So if we go to the next slide again. So very, very similar to what I described before for the pre-doctoral fellowship. So the DF itself, so the doctoral fellowship, is open to all health and social care professionals. So doctors and dentists are eligible to apply for the DF, as well as kind of all the other health and social care professionals as well. The DCAF is very specifically again for ICA eligible registered health and care professionals, so your nurses, midwives, allied health professionals, dietitians, etc. They can apply for the DCAF, but they can also apply for the DF as well should they wish. And DLAF, as I mentioned, is open to local authority individuals as well. So if we move on to the next slide, so we'll touch firstly on the doctoral fellowship. So as I briefly mentioned there, if you can go next slide, please, Catherine. So this is open to applicants from any background, both clinical and non-clinical, and it's for those that are wanting to undertake a PhD within a certain research area, and they have that commitment and potential to develop both as a health researcher within their proposed career. So there's an option available for the DF to undertake 20% of the fellowship to maintain your clinical and professional development, and charity partnerships are available. So For the DFs, we'll fund, it's a 3-year award, and again, can be undertaken on a full or part-time basis. We'll fund your salary, your research costs, PPI, training development, up to £3,000 for your conference costs as well. So also included in this is the PhD fees. So this has been a recent change where we only used to fund a proportion of your PhD fees, which would match the UKRI standard rate. But moving forwards now, the NIHR will fund the entirety of your PhD fees within the application. So that's just been a change, which will be coming for round 11, which launches in October. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I've listed just some of the assessment criteria here. So what the selection committee will be looking to see is your commitment and potential to develop yourself as a future research leader within health and social care. The research and the training programme that you've documented in your application, and the support from your supervisory team and your host organisation. So they're all equally weighted. So it's really important that each of these specific sections are as strong and as detailed as possible. So the doctoral fellowship launches twice annually. So it launched in April this year, and it's set to launch this year on October the 19th. So hot off the press, the launch date for the next round of the DF. So the DCAF, moving on. So as I mentioned, it's an ICA programme. So the eligibility here, you must be registered with one of the professional regulatory bodies as listed on the screen there. Similar to the PCAF scheme. So if we move on to the next slide, there's a bit more information here about the DCAF. So again, we'll fund healthcare professionals, excluding doctors and dentists. So again, this isn't open to doctors or dentists to undertake a PhD by research. And in doing so, with the DCAF, you will maintain your professional development and kind of continue within your practice role. So to be eligible, you need to be an English funded health or social care provider, have a year's professional experience, and have the support of your supervision and practice development. So essentially these, the DF and the DCAF are really similar in terms of kind of the funding and support that are available. However, the kind of key differences here with this scheme is that it's the practice time. So with the DF, it's not mandated that you incorporate 20% of your time to the fellowship to maintaining your professional development, whereas for the DCAF that does need to be dedicated. So you do need to build that in your application, kind of the time allowance for that kind of moving forwards. So it's predominantly that key difference there. And this launches in March and September each year. So I think it's due to launch tomorrow, actually, the DCAF. So this one launches just a tiny bit earlier than the DF. So if we want to move on to the DLAF real quick. So again, like all the other LAF schemes, it's focusing on practitioner academics who work in a local authority to undertake a PhD. So really similar to the PCAF in terms that you need to be based at a local authority or a local authority supporting service. And again, as I've just mentioned for the DCAF, the funding and support is exactly the same. And the practice time, again, there's that 20% that you need to incorporate to maintain in your clinical and professional development. And this, I think this one's just launched, I think. I'll have to double check. If it's not, it does launch in September at some point. So by the end of the month, it should be out there at the very least, if it's not already. So moving on, I kind of touched upon charity partnerships. So the next slide kind of details a bit about what we do with charity partnerships. So we offer jointly funded fellowships, and there's different partners each round. So there's some on the screen there that we've previously launched with. So the advantages is that you have the support from 2 different funders, and each application kind of goes through the same review process. But the charity partnerships for each round does vary. So what I would recommend is double checking with the guidance notes to see which charity partners are collaborating with us in each round. And yeah, it should all be detailed in there. But essentially, The charity organisation will provide part of the funding for your fellowship. So as I mentioned there, you get the kind of get the best of both worlds with collaborating with another charity. So moving on, coming towards the end of the presentation now. So I'm just going to touch briefly upon the application and assessment process. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see there, this is the pre-doctoral level assessment process. So we have the application window and then there's the selection committee review. So once we receive all the applications, we'll check for remit and then we'll assign each selection committee member an application to review. So there's 3 reviews done per application. Once we get them all in, we'll collate all the scores and then we'll decide who gets shortlisted at the shortlisting meeting. Then whoever's kind of shortlisted from that meeting will then be recommended for funding through DHSC, and then we'll confirm the outcomes to the applicants, and then the awards will start on the specified dates within the application form. So I think for the January launches for the pre-docs, I think the start dates are September to March each year, and that has to start on the 1st of the month. So if we go to the doctoral level schemes, the only slight difference here is that we'll have the shortlisting meeting, and then those who are shortlisted have to go through an interview process. And as I mentioned there, this is where the selection committee members will explore a bit more about about the application that you've put forward. So there'll be a lead reviewer, a lead interviewer, sorry, and a second interviewer. And also there'll be a PPI representative as well that kind of asks you questions during the interview to kind of, explore the application a bit more. Kind of if anything's been flagged at shortlisting, we can obviously ask you yourself kind of the questions there that want answering. And then once we've had the interviews, the selection committee will decide from the scores from the interviews who's recommended for funding or not. And then they kind of goes through the same process in informing DHSC, and then they'll confirm the outcomes to us. So if we go on to the next slide. So supervision, I've just kind of put in a slide here about supervision. I think it might get touched upon with some of the other speakers. So the core supervision should be at your host and partner organisation. So there's many questions where we have sometimes supervisors who's the lead supervisor based at another institution. So it's making sure that you have the right supervisor, but also have the making sure that the supervisors are available to kind of, if there's any kind of questions or queries, kind of making sure that they are at hand. So kind of making sure that your first supervisor is predominantly your host HEI is important. But then other members of your supervisory team can be based at other HEIs, and I think it's the selection committee like to see kind of forging collaborations with other supervisors across organisations. It's also in making sure that you have the supervision which is appropriate to your application, making sure you have the necessary expertise on your panel. So a lot of the pitfalls that we have regarding supervision is, say, for example, somebody's application has a lot of methodological work in it, but they don't have a supervisor in statistics, for example. So it's making sure that kind of the research that you're proposing, you have the necessary kind of supervision there to kind of back it up as you go along. And how many is too many? So kind of, I guess too many cooks can spoil the broth sometimes. So it's making sure that you have an appropriate number of supervisors for the research proposal that you're putting forward. So who will really be supervising you is kind of the key questions there. So I would like a recommendation would be just to have as many supervisors as you actually need, and don't have too many unless it's required. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So a bit of advice to kind of finish off. So know the process and the remit. So can't stress enough to kind of look at the website, look at the remit, read the guidance, get in touch with us if you have any kind of questions or queries, or talk to the RDS service. This is kind of what they are here to do, to support you in developing and supporting your proposal. I've put on here, don't add PPI as an afterthought. It's an integral part of the application. So As I mentioned, you will be assessed on your PPI if you go forward to interview at doctoral level. Not so much at the pre-doctoral level, but definitely at the doctoral level, it will be assessed. So make sure that it's well thought through and that you've consulted who you need to consult prior to putting in your application. And I've also put here kind of talk to others, like supervisors, kind of current award holders, experts in like methodological areas, collaborators, mentors, etc. Just speak to as many people as you can to kind of gain advice before putting in an application, because it's really, really valuable, kind of the experience and the knowledge that they have. If you go next slide, please. So I think this is one of my last slides. So as I mentioned there, remit, make sure you're aware of the remit. Timing, make sure you have enough time to submit the form. So even though we launch in October, kind of start thinking about it prior to the application window, because these applications do take time to put together. Think about yourself as an applicant. Are you experienced enough for the current level that you're applying at? Your support, so if a host support doesn't provide a strong enough statement of support or it's poorly articulated, then that can be a potential weakness in your application, and it's something that the selection committee can mark you down on. And also your training, making sure it's suitable and specific to your needs and the project's needs as well. So if we go next slide, please. So the last question I've got on here is if we have a lot of people ask if they're unsuccessful, can you apply again? And you can do so. So if you can apply on one further occasion should you be unsuccessful, but you must wait a year to do so. So you can't apply to the next round that will be opening. You have to wait for the subsequent round to do that. That's to ensure you have enough time to take on board the feedback that you will have received, and you can kind of incorporate that into a revised application. However, if you were deemed fundable at interview, but if there are not enough funds to be able to fund you, you are able to apply in the next round. However, again, we do advise that you incorporate any feedback that you've received. I think that's it. So if we go to the next slide, there's the Academy email address there. The web address there, and then the next slide as well has some links for additional resources on the slide there. So hopefully these slides will be shared with you after the presentation, and the contact details to get in touch with the Academy as well, email address and website are on the screen as well. So I hope that was clear. Yeah, I look forward to any questions kind of later on in the session. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Liz. Yeah, very clear, very helpful presentation. For those who joined perhaps a little bit late, we are recording today's session so that all of those slides will be available. And we'll take questions towards the end in our panel session. I'm going to move us on now to our next speaker, who's Hannah Barnsley. Hannah's a radiographer at the Royal Marsden, and today she's going to tell us a little bit about her journey to get a successful PCAF award. Over to you, Hannah.
Hi there. Okay, let me try and share this. We did practice. Oh, no, that's wrong. Okay, can we see that?
Yep, that's come up.
Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Hannah, and I've just started on the 1st September my PCAF Fellowship. Okay, just apologies in advance if I trip over my words. I'm not that good at speaking in front of people. Okay, so a little bit about my background. So I've been a radiographer for 18 years, which is a bit scary. I spent many years of that working all over the world and generally just having quite a good time. So I have come to this whole research thing a little bit late, maybe, in comparison to some people. And it wasn't until I did my MSc when I got back to the UK that I actually discovered this world of research, doing my major project for my MSc. And I really enjoyed that. It was just something that I took to, and I just kind of, you know, that's what I am interested in. Both my jobs back in London have involved the, you know, scanning research patients. In MRI, we do that a lot. And then just working at RMH, working with a few PhD students as part of my clinical role, kind of help facilitating those kind of the research scans and dealing with the research subjects. I just found it all very interesting. So for the PCAF, you don't need to have had a lot of research experience, thankfully. Obviously, for people who want to build up into it. So I had very little experience when I applied, and this is what I had on my application. So my MSc paper was published with the radiologist and the medical physicist that I worked with. And then I'd done a couple of poster presentations at various conferences, and I had a paper based on those poster presentations in undergoing review when I applied for the PCAF earlier this year. So it's not a massive amount, but it's something. So I was asked how I approached my application. And there are a few ways that I did this. So first of all, I actually created an account with the NIHR Academy. There's a lot of the application I found that you can input already. All your basic information, your work history, CV, things like that, that can already be put in to the account. So by the time the application was released, I didn't have to worry about all of that kind of information. And if you've had anyone's had as many jobs as I've had over the years, it takes time, and it was time that I could do, you know, saved once the application was out. I also had started looking at what the previous year's application involved and what kind of questions they asked. And even though obviously you're not guaranteed to have the same questions, I started kind of drafting answers to the previous year's, which then could be adapted if the, you know, the questions had changed. But I found that really useful, just starting to think about what I had done and the kind of explaining the area of investigation. So for the PCAF, you don't need a fully fledged kind of idea questions. Luckily I did, and it really helped me to explain the area of investigation. It was only 250 words. It wasn't a large section of the application, so you've really got to sell that area. And I found that really helpful by having quite a clear idea of what I wanted to do in the future. And then the actual development of the application, once it was released, my primary supervisor was incredible. I'm not quite sure how I'd have tackled it without her, to be honest. I was very lucky in the fact that I had a lot of colleagues at the ICR, at the RMH, who were experienced in this and were able to read my application, were able to give me advice. And also my primary supervisor, she had the contacts as well, which was quite key. Being very new to this kind of research world, I didn't have, I really still don't have the contacts, and my supervisor was pivotal in being able for me to put the application together with the right team. And then I joined up to a program, the Steps to Fellowship Success Program, which the RDS ran in line with the ICR. So that was an amazing kind of opportunity to listen to lots of different speakers who are all giving different advice. And you know, if there's something like that in the future, wherever people are, I would highly recommend signing up to something like that. Even though it was pitched a lot of it above the PCAF level. I thought it was incredibly, it helped me develop my training plan, and because it helped me understand the basics of what I need now to be able to put it in, what I need to put in for my, the doctoral application. And that was such an incredible program that I would recommend anything like that. And then the training plan, the training plan really is very important, and it was probably where I got my fewest number of kind of marks, as it were, on my training plan. There were already things that I knew that I needed to develop. I'd done only quantitative research in the past, so I knew that I would need to develop my qualitative kind of research. I knew that I would need to start looking into statistics, PPI. Those were all things that I knew I needed to work on. But it was with the help of like my supervisors and my colleagues kind of at the ICR and RMH that I realised there was lots of different aspects to the training plan that I didn't realise. CPD was a big one, and actually I think all 3 reviewers had mentioned CPD in the feedback to my application, and the fact that they noted it was there. Kind of things like leadership and well-being and the writing and presenting. Having kind of added all of those, it kind of spanned what I think, this developing of kind of researchers in the health service, it expanded, but I was quite blind to that fact until it was pointed out to me. So the training plan really is very important and needs to have the breadth to be able to cover what the NIHR is kind of wanting to achieve. So yeah, that's kind of how I went about my application. I did have a few dramas, which I think everyone needs to think about. I mean, you can't predict them. I had my secondary supervisor pulled out a week before the application was due, which was quite stressful at the time, especially not knowing people who would be able to fulfill that role. And again, my primary supervisor was the one that reached out to this person, and my primary supervisor was the one that then reached out to my secondary supervisor. So I'm incredibly thankful. I don't really know what I would have done, but it did mean that I was then submitting and finalising my application from a different country, which I don't really recommend unless you're based somewhere. It did all come together, obviously, but it's just these kind of dealing with the hiccups, as it were. There will be some, but it did, it can still work out. I think, as our last speaker had just said, the main feedback from my applications from my reviewers, I didn't realise how important it really was for, the whole team really is critiqued. And there is a whole section on site and supervisors that the reviewers go through. So it really is important to have that team behind you. And as I said, my primary supervisor was pivotal in my being able to have that team behind me. So it really just goes to show how important the team is, and it is a team situation. Evidence-based tool. This was actually copied and pasted from one of my from one of the reviewers' feedback, and this was in relation to my training plan. They were happy with my training plan. However, it was noted that it did lack justification on some aspects, and it lacked expected outcome from the training that I was proposing. So I think that's a really good thing, to actually use a framework to be able to develop the training plan, because it really is very important and does get marked. It's a big section of it. And I said, don't forget CPD. I'm on the 12 months full-time PCAF, and the fact that all 3 reviewers commented on the fact that CPD was present, I think was I don't know, I read something into that maybe it's not always. So I thought that was important. And then they also highlighted areas where I could gain more experience, which would give me a more competitive DCAF application. So I've never, when I put this application in, had been awarded any grants. And that was something that all 3 reviewers had stated and suggested that maybe working on that could give me a better chance in the DCAF proposal. And also more the other thing, more first author papers as well. Publications was also suggested as not a be all and end all, but you know, just to strengthen that application. So that was kind of the main feedback that I got. So I think just lastly, my tips: start early. As I said, I filled in a lot of the basic information on an NIHR Academy account even before the application was released, which gave me that time, you know, when the application was open, to purely focus on the questions, my training plan, my research background, things like that. And especially at the PCAF stages, for those who haven't got much research experience behind you, I did a few free online courses beforehand. It was pointed out to me that writing about how I'm going to include PPI shouldn't be my first kind of delve into PPI, like actually kind of during the fellowship. So I think it was through Imperial, I did some e-learning modules, which I was able then to put into the application, and just to, you know, show that I'm serious about it, and I've kind of got this kind of, you know, a broader representation of what I've already got. And then the team, I mean, I've said it, Liz said it, it's really important. Which, yeah, I didn't realise beforehand. And I also had a wonderful RDS advisor, Mary, who read my application a few times and gave me some really solid feedback. So whatever form the RDS takes in the future, I would highly recommend contacting them and getting their advice, because Mary was incredible. And then also, just lastly, get as many people as possible to read the application. Because even though it might be healthcare professionals, you know, going and reviewing these applications, I was pretty certain there wouldn't be any MRI radiographers reading my application, and therefore just making sure that it is understandable to a wide audience, you know, losing the terminology, and, you know, just making it very accessible, which obviously in the future, when you start writing lay summaries and things, is even more important. But I had a lot of people read my application, luckily, and that was really helpful to me. And I think that's probably it. Yeah. So that was just my experience.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. Some really useful insights. So thanks for sharing those with us. I'm now going to move us on to our next presenter, Erica Paul. Erica is a research fellow at UCL and is going to give us an overview of her application for a doctoral award. So over to you, Erica.
Thanks so much. Just give me a moment to get my slides up. The share button is not working right now. Just give me a minute. Just let me click one more time, and then I'll ask Catherine to share the slides. I know you've got them as well. We do use Teams on a daily basis, so I'm very familiar with sharing, but for whatever reason, yeah, it's just not coming up. Catherine, please may I ask you to share my slides?
Sure, just give us a sec.
Thanks so much. I had to come into a colleague's room because I use a shared office, so maybe if they've got a different Teams something on their account.
I tried to leave it open for everyone, but every now and again that happens.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I'm just getting share options now. I'll do it from my side if that's okay.
Okay.
Because then I get a bit more control. Just one moment. super. So hopefully you've got my presentation there, and I'm just going to put it on presenter mode.
Great. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So hello, my name is Erica, and I'm going to share my experience of applying for an NIHR PhD fellowship. Someone shared this to show the difference between the first day of your PhD and the day of your Viva. But to be honest, this is how I felt from the first day of writing my fellowship to handing it in. It was a mega process, and it took much more time and effort than I think anyone outside of academia really understands. So I think this is just to mention that, to give it kind of sufficient time and space, because it is a fairly mega process. So this was the timeline from starting to think about my PhD to actually starting it, and like I say, much longer than I'd originally anticipated. So in about October, December of 2021, I started thinking about submitting this fellowship and meeting with potential supervisors and thinking about the research question. I actually met with quite a lot of people, and I mentioned to them, I'm looking into this and I'm considering you as a potential supervisor. I probably met with around, let me see, 6, 7, 8 people maybe as possible supervisors, because on chatting with colleagues who've got their PhDs already, I kind of understood the really importance of that kind of supervisory relationship, not just in terms of, you know, kind of methods and thematic expertise, but in terms of that really intense one-on-one relationship. And so I felt that it was important to kind of gauge that. So I kind of almost speed dated possible supervisors for a good few months. And then by January of that year, I had selected my final supervisory team and, of course, kind of let everyone know. Over the next couple of months, I worked on refining my research question and the objectives. And by early May, I had a first very basic draft of the kind of major sections. In April and May, I was really happy to get a small PPI grant from the NIHR RDS, the PIF, and so I was able to undertake my PPI at that point over April and May, talking with people with lived experience as well as healthcare providers. And kind of May, June, July was really about kind of refining the research question objectives, looking at the methods, and a fairly major redraft again, following and incorporating lots of the input from the PPI group. And I think I probably redrafted, I was looking back at my old folders last night, I think I probably did about 6 or 7 full redrafts. And during that time, I was meeting my primary supervisor weekly, and then my secondary supervisors would come along when they could, between about probably 1 and 3 times within the month. So I had quite a lot of meetings and quite a lot of support and input. I know some colleagues have had that with much less, but that was the way that suited me and the team of people that I was working with. I submitted the application in July. I did the July sitting in 2022, and then felt a lot of relief, but also waited quite anxiously to see what the outcome would be. We were told interviews in kind of October, November time, so it was lots of waiting. In October, I was invited to interview, and they actually only gave us 4 weeks to interview, which I thought was fairly short, being that we were all, it's a clinical academic scheme, so we were all NHS workers, and we normally have to give 6 weeks notice for annual leave. So that was a bit of a mad scramble to try and sort things out. But luckily I have really supportive colleagues, so got the invitation to interview, and then 4 weeks later I interviewed in November, and then again a very anxious wait for the next couple of months, and I was informed of the outcome about 12 weeks later. So January 2023, I was told I'd got it. So that's, you know, 6 months after I submitted the written application, and already a year since the first kind of proper meetings to talk about it. I've heard of colleagues waiting months longer than that to hear the outcomes of interviews. So that's another just thing to be aware of in terms of job planning. And then the 6 months between January and me starting the PhD in June were lots of contract negotiations, which again was something very new to me. So between the NIHR, the University of UCL, and the solicitors at UCL, which was a department I'd never spoken to before, there was lots of negotiations, confirming certain budget lines, and then discussions between the solicitors about clauses and things within the contract. I'm told 6 months is considered quick for a contract. So again, that's just something to be aware of and to kind of build into timelines. So what is my PhD about? My PhD is looking at the barriers, facilitators and preferences for HIV prevention in people experiencing homelessness, and it's a mixed method study. So I'm doing some quantitative work with a discrete choice experiment, that's a kind of statistical survey method, and then I'm doing some qualitative work with some rapid ethnography as well as some focus groups and interviews. And really importantly, I'm working with a co-production group and also a salaried peer researcher throughout this whole project. And who am I and how did I get here? So I'm a clinical academic trainee doctor. My specialty is HIV and sexual health. And I've been interested in research and sort of planning towards the PhD for quite a long time now, essentially since I started working as a doctor. Back at medical school, I definitely wasn't interested in research. I thought that was for people who got the top scores in the exams, and that wasn't me. I was a solid second decile exam performer, and I thought research was all about labs and microscopes and cell proteins, and again, that wasn't my bag. So it was only really probably towards the end of medical school that I became aware of public health, and that kind of showed me this other area of research, thinking about the kind of much broader perspective, thinking about the social determinants of health and epidemiology, and that really spoke to me and how I thought about kind of health more broadly. And so it was following that kind of interest that I applied to an academic foundation program, which I did up in York, and did some kind of epidemiological work related to HIV. After my foundation program, I took a year out and did my master's in public health. And you can see me graduating there. And then after that, I've done my clinical training and had an academic clinical fellowship. So again, I've had kind of time out of clinical work through those schemes in order to get my kind of footing in research. I've also spent a fair amount of time in the last 10 years working on clinical trials team. That was mostly through my ACF, but also I did an OOP to spend a year working as a clinical trials doctor. Also, in the last 10 years since I qualified for medical school, I've taken all my clinical specialty exams. So 3 exams for the MRCP and then 3 further subspecialty exams for my HIV and sexual health specialty. So there was a lot to kind of sort out and get in place. And how did I get this fellowship? So I want to be really honest and upfront that it was not my first time. It was my 5th time, and that's completely normal. I did a quick survey of colleagues on the floor here at UCL, and most people had at least 2 to 3 goes as standard before they got funded. As you can see, from 2016, that was kind of December 2016 onwards, I put 4 applications in kind of back to back to back in an 18-month period, and that was fairly intense. I was interviewed twice and I got 2 straight rejections. These were all for sort of slight tweaks and versions of the same project, and after the 4th rejection, I decided to pause and take a bit of stock before applying again. In the interim, both my parents became very unwell, so I became a carer and went part-time, and I also had a baby, went on mat leave, and there was also a global pandemic, so a lot of things happened, I think, in the interim. And then in 2022 you can see obviously that I was successful and I'm now doing my PhD. And a lot of people ask me what was different this time, and the answer is actually lots of things. I think from the earlier unsuccessful applications, I'd had some feedback that I was really kind of focused on actioning. So one of the feedbacks was that although I had a couple of publications, they weren't very scientific enough, according to the reviewer. I had kind of case reports and kind of comment pieces in reviews, and they said that's not scientific enough. So I focused on getting some scientific sounding I did an analysis on a secondary data for a cohort study, and worked on some other projects, both ones that I led and with colleagues, to ensure I had scientific feeling publications. I was also told that I didn't have any small grants, so I wasn't kind of proven as someone who can be trusted with a lot of money. Initially, I felt that was fairly harsh for a doctoral application. You know, that's for most people their first grant. But actually, I worked pretty hard, and I had, by the end, 3 small grants prior to submitting my DRF. So I had 2 small grants for PPI and public engagement, and I also was the lead applicant on a separate small grant, a starter grant for another project. And me having held grants and me having led a project was something that received a lot of comment, both in my reviews and in my interviews. So I think that was a really clearly a good thing that I did. I also did a preliminary analysis. So a colleague held a data set which informed my doctoral study. And so I was able to do a preliminary analysis on their data, take that analysis to conference, and then that meant that I was able to talk about my own work in this area prior to doing the, applying the DRF. It was also a new project and new supervisors. I'd also undergone a lot of professional and personal development during the kind of interim 4 years between my 4th and 5th application, and I got those subspecialty exams. So when I was initially applying in those first applications, I held my MRCP, but I hadn't completed my subspecialty exams. So now going into this one, I'm a senior registrar with all my exams, which I think makes a difference. I did proper PPI for this doctoral fellowship, partly because that's a requirement of the NIHR, but mostly because I think it's really important to do. Whereas because when I was applying previously to MRC and Wellcome, there wasn't even a section on those application forms for PPI, and I think this project really benefited from having had that for really obvious reasons. I also, maybe with a bit more of maturity, stopped searching for a perfect project, and I thought kind of a bit, I guess, kind of tactically feels like the wrong word, but I guess I thought a bit more objectively about prioritising what was important to me and acknowledging that a perfect project didn't exist. So what was important to me was methods. I wanted to gain new methodological skills in qualitative methods, which I hadn't done before, and subject. So incorporating some aspect of the social determinants of health was really important to me. And so that's why one of the reasons why I focused on the group of people experiencing homelessness. I think also it just felt different for all the reasons I've spoken about and more. I was just a completely different applicant in 2022 compared to 4 or 5 years earlier. So what was my interview like? It was via Zoom in 2022. That's still how they ran. I don't know what kind of NIHR is doing going forwards. There was a panel of about 10 to 15 people. And interestingly, they weren't individually on Zoom. They were sat in a boardroom in Leeds, and I was the only person individually on Zoom, which I have to say I found a bit strange. I would have preferred to be physically with them in the room, but that wasn't a choice I had. The interview started with a 5-minute presentation that was very strictly timed, so very important to practice, and then there was 20 minutes of questions. Obviously, I'm not permitted to share the exact questions that were asked, but kind of the sort of things that were spoken about was, people had clearly given a very detailed read to my project, and so they might say, in project 3 in month 25, you're going to do this thing with your methods. Why are you doing that? Why do you think it's the best option? What other methods did you consider? So it's important to know your project inside out, and also to be able to explain the rationale and defend your methodological choices. Other things they asked were, in this particular project, would X be an issue, and how would you mitigate that? So in a mock interview, so I can share it, I was asked, for my focus groups, well, would recruitment be a problem? What if people just didn't want to talk to me? So the kind of answer that I gave was about working really closely with the co-production group, so people with lived experience of homelessness, as well as with my peer researcher, to make sure that everything, was kind of acceptable and appropriate before we get started, so to kind of prevent that problem. But also, if I did then experience challenges with recruitment, then I had options like opening up to more sites, or considering other kind of methods, or asking people who declined to participate why they didn't, and then seeing if I needed to make a change or an amendment. So those are the kind of things and answers that I gave. There was also a lay member on the panel, who got a significant amount of time allotted in the interview, and their questions really focused a lot on the PPI, my use of the peer researcher, and how my pre-fellowship PPI, kind of what that had entailed, and a lot of detail about that, and things like perhaps remuneration and training and that kind of thing. So that was a big focus, both the PPI that I'd done and the PPI that I planned. And how did I prepare for it? So, like I said, 4 weeks notice was a bit of a shock, but I've got a very supportive boss and colleagues, and so I was able to, with a fair bit of negotiation, take 3 solid weeks off of my clinics. I think I worked full-time during those days in the office. I just wasn't doing my NHS work. I had 5 mock interviews, so 4 via colleagues within kind of my wider institute at UCL, and 1 through the Research and Design Service. And I gave the presentation about 1 million times with a lot of stopwatches. And thinking a bit more about kind of top tips, the first thing that I would say is get to know the guidance notes really, really well. It's a bit like sitting in GCSE exams and looking at the marking criteria. The NIHR is not hiding what they want you to do. They've written it all out in this book. So what I did was I did print this document. Sorry to the environment, but with a document this big, I need it to be on paper, not on a screen. So I printed this document kind of early doors when I was getting ready to prepare for my fellowship application, and I just went through it with a highlighter, highlighting every single section, making sure I really knew what they wanted me to put in each section of the application form. And then again, when I was writing it and reviewing it, I would go back to that section. So for example, the PPI plans section is only 350 words. It's a really tight word limit. So I needed to make sure that I was including the things that the NIHR wanted me to tell them, like how frequently we'd meet, who would be in the PPI group, what training I might provide them, what the structure of the meetings would be. And so it was important to know that I was hitting all those points, a bit like you do when you're preparing for an exam. So reading this and rereading it again is really vital. I also made this checklist and I stuck it on the wall of my office in A3 because I think in the beginning, in the kind of January time, I felt a bit overwhelmed just writing kind of do fellowship on my to-do list. It was just too big. So I made myself this table and I just broke down every single section of the fellowship into the sections as kind of per the NIHR. And I gave myself options to tick things off because that makes me feel better. So I had a tick that I could give when I just started that section. I had a tick that I could give myself when it was drafted, and I had a tick that I could give myself when it was completed. And that helped me to kind of keep a bit of kind of awareness of what I had left to do and help me feel like I was making progress. I also had some advice to tick off some low-hanging fruits. So a bit like the previous speaker, you know, if I had just an hour between clinics or in an admin session, I was like, right, I can do something in an hour. I can fill in my publications, or I can do the kind of CV section, or I can do a bit of tweaking or editing just to make sure that I had little things that I could check off and make some progress, even if I only had a little bit of time. I also got in touch with the NIHR Research Design Service, and like the previous speaker, I had an advisor, Joe, who was really helpful. Through the NIHR RDS, I got my pre-doctoral PPI grant, which is a kind of standard £350, which my understanding is that if you're part of a linked institution, you're fairly guaranteed to get. It was really helpful for me. It helped me put that I'd had some money given to me, and it funded the PPI that is required. So I was really sad on looking on the website to see that this is closing in a couple of weeks. So I hope that that just means it's available in a different location, but definitely think about applying for the Public Involvement Fund if you're eligible. Like I said, I got the advisor Joe, who was really helpful, and it was fantastic to have someone who wasn't my supervisor, because, you know, 6 months in, my supervisors are deep in the project, and you need someone with kind of external eyes. Joe reviewed the application and also helped organise one of my mocks, so really vital. And then my kind of final tips are to think about mentorship. So I have a formal mentor through my university who again has got that kind of objectivity. She's not my supervisor, she's not my line manager, and we've met quarterly for the last 5 years, and she's really supported me through the processes of working towards this. A lot of support from friends and colleagues. So this is a group of us research fellows here at UCL Krish, and in fact we're congratulating Dermot on his successful Viva in that picture, and they were fantastically helpful in sharing their kind of experiences through applications, and looking through their applications to understand a bit about what worked for them. I underestimated this. It's really important to start the administrative bits early. So a SOCAT form was my absolute last minute drama, as the other speaker had with her secondary supervisor. SOCAT was my near devastating moment. A SOCAT form is a form that's required if any of your research will take place in an NHS setting. So because I'm recruiting from an NHS outreach service, I needed SOCAT sign off. I thought a couple of weeks was okay for that, but my local research office required 6 weeks notice in advance to book a meeting to have a conversation about a SOCAT, and they weren't flexible on that. And so I ended up, with 1,000 emails and crying on the phone to someone to get that signed off with about 24 hours notice before my application was due. It was horrific. So I tell everyone, if you're thinking about an application that involves even setting your feet on an NHS site, think about SOCAT with at least 3 months to go. Head of department sign off is also required, and my head of department changed role 11 days prior to my submission, so it's just worthwhile giving your head of department a heads up that you're planning on this. You might know them really well. They might actually just be a person in an office in a completely different building that you don't really meet, and that's how it is sometimes. So it's worth giving them a heads up, again, with a couple of months notice. I'm planning on submitting this. I really need your support. Getting them aware of it, getting it in their diary. They might be on annual leave, getting their PA's contact details, their PA's email and phone number, because in the end, the PA was central to getting mine clicked and signed off. And I think I've already talked about taking off the kind of low-hanging fruit and ensuring that you're really aware of the guidance notes. And I've talked as well about kind of importance of interviews, having lots of mocks and presentation practice, and ideally some time off to prepare. So that's everything from me, and I'm really happy to take any questions now or at the end, however Catherine and the team prefer.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks for sharing your journey, and just to say congratulations to both Hannah and Erica on their awards.
Thank you.
In view of the time, we're going to move straight on to the next presenter, and we'll take questions at the end. I'd now like to introduce Professor Richard Hooper. Richard's Professor of Medical Statistics at the Centre for Clinical Trials and Methodology at Queen Mary, and he's also a panel member, and it's in that capacity today we've asked Richard to join us and share his insights into what the panel are looking for in applications and at interview. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Peter. Let me see if I can share my slides. Can you see those okay?
Yep, great.
Good. So, as Peter said, my background's in medical statistics, but I've been a member of the NIHR Advanced Fellowships panel for a few years now, and I've been closely involved in Research Design Service London for a long time. I might occasionally talk about my direct experience of the Advanced Fellowships panel, but I want to try to give you some advice that applies to all the levels of fellowships, including doctoral fellowships. I've spoken at these RDS events for a few years, so if you've been thinking about fellowships for some time, you might have heard me say some of these things before, but hopefully they bear repeating. I'm not going to talk for long. I'm just going to talk to some key themes and probably reinforce things that Hannah and Erica and others have also said today. To move my slides on, hold on. Is that not working?
Shall I upload them, Richard, from my end?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I think you might need to, because I can't advance my slides for whatever reason. Apologies, everyone.
Just bear with me. I've just got.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
I won't be so. What yours are titled? I've got too many on the screen. Bear with. Sorry, I won't be sick.
Great, thank you.
Okay, they should be there now.
Okay, so thank you. Perfect.
People see
So
them?
Yes.
Yep, great.
I wanted to come up with an economical title for this slide. Say this. So I think the first thing is it's important that you understand
Are you
why
muted,
you
Richard?
want. Oh, am I?
I
Can you hear me?
I can hear perfectly fine.
We can hear.
Okay. Well, let me know if there's an issue. I'll carry
Can't
on.
hear you, Richard.
Good. It's to understand why you want this. Why you want an NIHR.
Sorry, everyone. Richard,
Hopefully this goes.
You're not muted, but we can't hear you. Can you leave and come back, maybe?
We can hear very well.
Catherine, we can hear him. Okay.
You can. Okay, it's just me. All right.
All right.
Sorry, Richard.
I apologise to everyone. That's no problem. Hopefully, why you want it goes a little bit back that your line manager or your supervisor or someone in your institution has suggested this. You really want to think about why it's important to you, and the panel will want to hear an authentic voice, and they'll be trying to weigh up which of the applicants need this opportunity the most. So there's a chance. I mean, it's fantastic if your institution or your prospective supervisor are behind, and they may have their own reasons for supporting that, but make sure you understand and articulate. Because as I'm sure you understand from today's talks, in the right circumstances can be really the single most advancing and empowering research you can take, and you want to show why you're is now. At a doctoral level, a fellowship is almost certainly the first opportunity you'll ever have had to be in control of your own research program and of a generously funded training program. So make sure you can articulate why you should get that. I need the next slide. I don't know, Catherine's not going to be able to hear me now to
next slide.
Move on the slides.
There's that move over to slide 3, Richard, I think.
Oh, there we are. I can do it myself. I can navigate from the arrows. Perfect.
Excellent.
Okay. The next thing is clear. Write clearly. Write in plain words. Write something to read. NIHR panelists have a lot to read, and if I'm honest, there is a risk sometimes that we'll find some of them dull. It's okay. Sometimes there's a risk that applications will be dull and also incomprehensible, and I try to avoid that. The panelists who do the first round of review that then feed into the shortlisting discussion will not have the same discipline as you, and if they are from your discipline, they won't necessarily be experts in the particular topic that you're writing about. So almost all panelists will go straight away to the lay abstract of your application, hoping that this is the most comprehensible part. So make sure that the lay abstract is the most comprehensible part of your application, but the rest of the application understandable and comprehensible as well. Please do not use acronyms. I wish people would stop using applications. Just spell everything out, unless it's the most common acronym in the world. It never seems to make a difference how many times I suggest this to people, but I can promise experience of reading applications and reviewing them that acronyms make them extremely irritating to read. I know that some people think that using acronyms helps them keep to word counts, but I think if you start spelling words out, you may find that there's a kind of whole new in your writing, and you might end up using fewer words. The next is be different. People sometimes have sight of previous successful applications so that they can work through them and maybe copy them or try useful information from previously successful applications. I'm sure you can do that, but I don't think it's the best. I think a much more exciting strategy is to give the panel something for. I don't think there's a single cookie cutter kind of perfect fellow there. Don't worry about being original. And as I said earlier, the panel are looking for someone with an audience, and they're looking to achieve the greatest possible value in terms of research approaches and research disciplines, not just problems, but new approaches to old research problems. And NIHR are also best to ensure that kind of diversity among the panelists as well. Think too about the diversity of your team of supervisors or research support team. Think about whether something different to the table. If you have 3 supervisors who all look very similar, I think you might as well just have 1 supervisor. Try to get different expertise coming from different. Next, be prepared. As you've heard, for example, from Erica, if you've been shortlisted and invited to interview, you will prepare yourself, and that's good. I know that candidates can get particular about their presentation and the time limit on their presentation. I think that part of you is very much under your own control, and you can practice. And by the time you get to the interview, you'll hopefully have practiced enough that you can give the presentation in the required number of minutes, even in your sleep. And NIHR will let you know in advance of the interview, so nothing should be a surprise to you in terms of the format or in terms of those planned aspects of you. At the panels I've done since COVID restrictions were lifted, Erica said the panelists have been brought together face-to-face in the same room, but the candidates have come remotely through Zoom. So if you are asked to do an interview remotely through Zoom, make sure you first do a test call with someone that you trust and check that you're coming across loud and clear. Check that you can advance your slides and show your slides, as I wasn't able to do today. NIHR's invitation to do a test call prior to the interview, if they offer you one, just so you can check technical things. You do not want avoidable technical problems to get in the way of presenting your sensible light. But I should say that if there were problems on the table, you will find the panel are very understanding and will try to find an accommodation. So don't worry about things you have no control over. Do arrange mock interviews beforehand. That's a really good idea. Do practice taking random questions and difficult questions on the fly, because the hardest thing about interviews. Practice answering questions fluently. Practice when to stop speaking, because panelists have only a limited time to talk to you and they want to ask you. So you need to stop at some point to let them ask another question. And remember, finally, one piece of feedback that we often receive for you with an NIHR panel is much less terrifying than any previous you might have had with senior academics at your own institution. I think that's worth bearing in mind. And that kind of brings me to how I always end these presentations, which is to say that the most important thing about the panel is that they're just like you. They've been there, they've been in your place, they've applied for their own funding, they've had to look for ways to advance their careers, to implement their crazy ideas. And as a group of seniors, also committed to paying it forward and supporting and developing the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Some very useful insights there. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so the last presentation for today is just a brief overview of the support that's available for fellowship applicants from the NIHR. Can I check you can see my slides?
Yep.
Yep, is that okay? Great. So as you may have heard or read, we're at a transition point at the moment. The current NIHR Research Design Service, the RDS, will be replaced by a new NIHR Research Support Service on the 1st of October this year. At the moment, we're operating business as usual until the end of the month. So there's still a little bit of time to approach us to discuss support. And those discussions, we will determine whether it's best to stay with the RDS or to signpost you on to the RSS. You'll be pleased to know we've been granted a 6-month extension until the end of March 24. So we will be able to continue working with those we have on board for that additional 6 months, and we will work with people to complete their funding application until it's submitted, or we're at a suitable point where that support could be transferred to an RSS. So just to briefly give you an overview of the types of support that RDS London provides. We give broad support on study design and research methods. A key part is helping facilitate and stress the importance of public involvement, as we've heard during the presentations today. We can help form supervisory teams, giving you feedback on who you've chosen and who else you might consider. We help getting the narrative right, expressing benefits for patients and the public, and describing impacts. And we can also take a leading role in linking you with other parts of the NIHR and research infrastructure. So whether that's with a trials unit or with the clinical research network or with help getting costings, for example. Just to put a little bit more flesh on that, obviously, as Liz said, it's really important to get that past that basic remit check, which the NIHR make, and we can work with you to make sure your study is in scope and it addresses the funding criteria that they're looking for. Again, we can help you work through the guidance and make sure you're completing the sections correctly. We help people derive a clear research question and aims and objectives and refine those. As Richard said, the lay summary is really important. It's often the first section that reviewers read, so that can set the tone for the rest of the application. It's important that they're clear and easy to read. Make sure you've set out a very clear rationale and which states the importance and the need for the study and why it needs to be done now, and importantly, why it needs to be done by you. Make sure you have an appropriate study design. Think about equality, diversity and inclusion. Make sure you've had adequate lay involvement. Some PPI work, some pre-protocol PPI work is very important. It can help inform the research question, gives validity to the work and help define the methods you're going to use. We can talk to you about training plans. Also make sure you have the necessary research partnerships in place, and that may be your supervisory team. It may be talking to potentially members of charities or potentially even industry. So just to say a little bit then about the research support service. The new RSS will operate a little bit differently to the RDS. It will be a national coordinated service, and it will allow researchers to access the support they need independent of their location. It will be delivered collaboratively through 8 hubs, and each of those hubs will be able to either respond directly to researchers who approach them, or they'll be able to signpost them to another hub which has the appropriate methodological and clinical interests. There will be 3 hubs that have specialist support in public health or social care, so 2 for public health and 1 for social care. And just to say that further details will be announced in the next 2 weeks about how to contact and engage with the new research support service. So that's just a very brief overview of the ongoing support from the RDS, and also then a little bit about the support for the research support service, the new RSS. So that marks the end of the talks today. What I'd like to do now is to invite all of today's speakers to join me to form a panel, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. I can see a few have been coming in the chat as we've been speaking. Very happy to take questions via either mode. Either people can put them in the chat, or if they'd like to raise their hand, we can come to you and answer your question directly. Liz, thanks and Erica, thanks very much for monitoring the chat. I can see you've answered to quite a few of them already. Does anybody want to ask a question directly whilst I'm looking through the chat? Just raise your hand. Kidalia, would you like to come in?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I have applied for a pre-doctoral before with the PCAF in 2018, but actually I think it was great that I didn't got it because I think it was not the right place. So thank you, Eric, as well for sharing your experience of rejections that often are unheard of, but actually happen all the time. My question is, if I want to do, I'm thinking I have a master's already, so I decided to just pursue it anyway in a different way. And actually, I'm a public health from the London School, so glad to see other colleagues. My question is, if I want to integrate a travel abroad on the research application, is this types of funding and grants, are they the best ones, or should I just look for other opportunities, for example, the welcome one that actually have that travel cost incurred?
So can I just, I don't know who wants to come in. I was just going to kind of come in from an NIHR Academy perspective.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is that if there are any kind of overseas visits that you want to do as part, are you looking to apply for like a pre-doctoral or a doctoral?
I'll probably have to discuss further and see what's the best option. I'm just considering several options and see which one suits the best for what I want to do.
Yeah, so usually probably at the pre-doctoral level, we probably wouldn't support it unless there was a really strong justification in terms of how this will aid your training development, because at the pre-doctoral level, there'll be a small aspect, a small kind of component of research within like a PCAF or a PLAF. Not for a pre-doctoral fellowship for a methodologist, just to kind of clarify, but I think there's a smaller amount of potentially pilot work that you might do for the PCAF. So whether you could strongly justify it, then and kind of you can kind of demonstrate how that will help you kind of gain the knowledge and support to be able to kind of put forward a future doctoral application, that should be okay. But at the doctoral level especially, as long as you can justify why it's required, and I think the selection committee panel do like to kind of see you kind of broaden out your horizons a bit in that sense, in trying to travel into either different institutions within the UK, or if there's like a specialist like team abroad who kind of specialize in like a certain area that you want to kind of gain a bit more knowledge and experience from, and you can kind of justify that, then we would kind of fund those travel fees. So there's actually no limit for the doctoral fellowship in terms of training development costs or your research cost. It's just the conference costs, which are capped at £3,000. So as long as it's kind of strongly justified in the application, you can demonstrate why that visit is required and what you'll gain out of it, then there shouldn't be any issues whatsoever in terms of traveling abroad to kind of go and do certain aspects of your training there. So
okay, perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Erica, did you want to add a bit more to that?
Yeah, of course, just to kind of share my experience. So my understanding, although Elizabeth and others, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that for NIHR funding, the projects are required to take place within UK borders as your primary research. So my original project, the one that didn't get funded, was actually looking at HIV in South Africa, and that's why I was applying to UCL and wanted to welcome an MRC. I am actually going on an overseas research visit, so I fly next week, and I'm going for 6 weeks. So there is permitted an overseas research visit, but that for me is skill gaining, not a place of primary research. So just to kind of have that differential between, are you doing primary research or are you doing training? So I'm doing some training at University of British Columbia in Canada, because they have kind of expertise in my theme, which is about 20 years ahead of what we do here. So just that kind of differential between what are you wanting to do. But lots of us on the scheme within my department have had overseas research visits, but they're usually short, like 6 to 12 weeks. Yeah. And not about primary research, it's about training.
100%, yeah. Just to kind of echo what Erica said, that's pretty much bang on, yeah.
Thank you, thanks. There's a question in the chat, Liz, about applying for schemes in parallel. The example Claire's given is applying for the PCAF and PLAF at the same time.
I think you can. I know for the doctoral level you can. So I have many applications. You do have the odd person that applies for a DF and a DCAF at the same time. And then I think we've had one instance where they were successful for both, and then they had to choose which one they wanted to kind of go through. I've never really heard of it at the pre-doctoral level, so kind of like PCAF and PLAF. So what I can do is I can double check for you. I don't want to give you the wrong advice. But kind of providing that you're eligible for both, then I don't see why it would be an issue. But I can double check that for you in case there's any kind of issues with it. I'm not the scheme manager, you see, for both of those schemes. So
thank you, thanks Liz. Jake, would you like to come in and ask your question?
Yes, thanks everyone for your presentations. It was really helpful to hear. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm just finishing the PCAF and applying now for the DCAF. And one of the things that I noticed on the application guidance and on the chair's report is the sort of recommendation not to apply for a part-time based on professional sort of need or professional development need over and above the 20% that's already offered within the DCAF package. And I just wanted to check how much that would, if say we did apply for a part-time based on trying to sort of keep up with certain parts of my professional development based on my area of expertise, which is working with, sort of very high severity based cases, which requires a very high level of care and therefore a high level of time with the intervention that we do, how much that would impact the competitiveness of the application, if at all. Hopefully that makes sense.
Liz, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so did you say that you were applying over the 20% minimum? So
applying for a part-time fellowship, but based so that I can have a larger amount of time for my continued clinical and professional development.
Yeah, so for example, you might want to do it, I don't know, 75%, and then have that 25% maintaining kind of the clinical and professional development side of things.
Absolutely.
DCAF isn't, so I run the DF. At the DF, it wouldn't be a problem whatsoever. DCAF, I'm not sure, especially if it's been written in the chair's report, in that it kind of states that it's not preferential, I guess. I would probably need to double check if that's okay. I don't want to, again, give you the wrong advice here, because I'm not sure at the DCAF kind of how that potentially works. So what I could do is kind of put you in touch with my colleague, and he should be able to kind of clarify that for you. But kind of from like the flexibility in terms of the fellowship should be there for you to kind of be able to choose what suits you best. So if you feel like doing a 70% or a 65% fellowship and then kind of maintaining that professional development the remainder of the time, so like as I mentioned, if you did like a 75% fellowship and then a 25% kind of maintenance of clinical, I don't think you should be you shouldn't be penalised for that in my perspective, but I would want to double check with the DCAF scheme to see if there's anything kind of more substantial that I'm missing there. But certainly at the doctoral level, so for the doctoral fellowship, then you shouldn't be penalised whatsoever, because we have many individuals that do that in terms of kind of maintaining that clinical and professional development with the and kind of undertaking the fellowship part-time, so that the remaining time can be kind of, you can have like an honorary contract with like an NHS organisation or kind of other organisations to ensure that you are still kind of practicing and kind of moving forwards within your clinical side of things. So
right.
Yeah, so sorry, I can't give you a purely definitive answer in regards to the DCAF, but for the DF you're absolutely fine, but for the DCAF I can double check. So I'll put my email address in at the bottom, so if you just want it, or the email address for the Academy, and if you want to just drop us a line after this, and I can forward it on to the relevant scheme manager.
Will do, thank you.
Thanks Jake for your question, and thanks Liz.
Yeah.
Let's move to Amar. Amar, have you got a question?
Hi there. I've got 3 questions, hopefully nice and short. The first one is with regards to the funding limit for the doctoral. Am I right in understanding that there isn't actually a limit of what they would fund for the actual research project?
No, but everything you list in that proposal needs to be strongly justified, so you can't kind of apply willy-nilly for kind of everything under the sun. It kind of needs to be specific to your research proposal and kind of justified as to why that's required. And obviously the proposal in which you kind of outline, you will be able to kind of see what kind of, if there's any consumables, it'll be obviously related to the research project there. But yeah, there's no limit for research costs for the DF. No.
Second question is with regards to PPE. Is for the doctoral level, is it essential to have a PPE beforehand, or can you incorporate it in the actual project itself?
Do you mean the PPI? PPIE?
PPI, sorry,
yeah. I was going to say, like, we're all having like the surgical.
Everyone calls it different. Everyone calls it. Some people call it PPI. Some people call it.
Yeah,
PPE,
I know.
some people call it PPIE, and so yeah.
Yeah, it's all these acronyms. They kind of throw you a bit. So I think I've answered something in the chat that's quite similar to this. So it's beneficial if you can, obviously thinking about the fellow, and Erica should be able to come in terms of her experience with the PPI, but kind of from, I guess, the Academy and Richard obviously being on the panel, I think kind of starting to kind of formulate and think about the PPI prior to kind of the application window opening, and that'll help to formulate your research proposal in some aspects. So if you kind of get in early and kind of set up a focus group to kind of gain a bit of insight in terms of your actual proposal that you have planned, that could then kind of, you might find something really useful from that group and think, oh, I'm going to incorporate that into my proposal. And obviously you can then say in that aspect of the application form where you list all your PPI information, you can kind of already say, I've already spoken to so-and-so, I've already set up a group and they've said X, Y, Z. Kind of then throughout the fellowship, I will kind of use them and do this, that and the other. So I wouldn't say it's kind of necessary to do prior to an application, but it's really, really beneficial if you do, and I think it'll really, really strengthen your application. So Erica, Richard, I don't know if you want to come in and add to that.
I can share. So interestingly, I would say definitely. There's a section on the form, you've got 350 words where it says, what have you done for your PPI? And you don't want to leave a section blank when they're asking you to do it explicitly. It might feel a bit scary if you've not done it before, but NIHR run free training courses on it if you're affiliated with, a hospital or university, which obviously you will be. And there will likely be a PPI coordinator or someone to help you within your research department or within your university or within your NHS trust. And there might be groups already that you can kind of tag yours onto. So I don't know your clinical area, but for example, a colleague who's doing research related to kidneys, but they're not a nephrologist, they got in touch with the renal department and they actually had a running patient involvement PPI group. So they just said, can I come to one of your meetings? And it doesn't have to be like scary and hard, but like I say, it was a major focus of the lay panel members of section of my interview, and I I can't imagine the answer being no, I haven't bothered. I think that would be a major negative in your interview and your application from my perspective, obviously not as a panel member.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as you, Erica, so I agree.
Thank you.
And then just final question, when are we going to be getting the recording? Because I know you're recording and can we get access to that?
Yeah.
Because I missed the first half of that, internet issues.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, it will be a few days after, that's all. We'll just need to top and tail it a little bit, but it'll just be a few days and you'll have it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Question now from Florence. Would you like to come in?
Hello. Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talks today. That was really, really helpful. I've got a few questions. Firstly, with costs, I have gone to the involved guidance for PPI, but realistically, so for example, one of the things is lunch is £5. I don't know a single place you can buy lunch for £5 in London. So I have tried to justify in my section, I'm putting in £10 and I'm explaining my rationale for that. Is that something that would come back as a major problem? I'm just being realistic. I know how much things cost. You know, even in Sainsbury's it's still expensive. The second question was publications. So on the guidance notes, they say don't put in things that are in preparation or haven't gone through or blah, blah, blah. But what about things that have been accepted, but they don't have like a DOI number yet? Can you still put them in as accepted manuscript or?
I think so, yeah. So if you go onto the Aramis portal, you're able to manually input the information there. So I would suggest kind of doing that if you don't have like a DOI number as of yet. And you can kind of list in your application then that you've kind of had a publication accepted. And it'll obviously then show up as well in your publications, but you can kind of clarify that within the application itself and just, I guess when you're kind of inputting the information into the publication section of the application form, just kind of state that it's been submitted and that there's no DOI as of yet. But no, that shouldn't be an issue.
I think those were my main questions. And then the only other thing I just want to say was I was just speaking to some of my pre-doc. There's a few people in my pre-doc group and everyone's really delighted about the UKRI costs for PhD funding, because like that's been a major stress point for a lot of people in London, where the PhD costs are more like £6,000–7,000 as opposed to 4.5. So that's really well received by lots of people applying for these.
So prior to that, so we'd always expect the host organisation to kind of foot the remainder. So I think it was 4,700-ish that we'd fund at the current levels. So kind of any difference, we'd always expect the host organisation to foot that. So it wouldn't kind of be personally to the applicant themselves, but yeah, it's a great step that we've kind of made in terms of funding the whole of the PhD fees. So yeah, it's just really good. So very, very pleased, and it'll, like you say, it alleviates that bit of anxiety as well from those who are applying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Marina, would you like to come in?
Hello, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and for all the extra information given. It was very helpful. I just wanted to ask in terms of scientific impact prior to application. So how many publications do you expect from the applicant for doctorate level? And whether the electronic poster with DOI would count as a publication? Because in some radiological conferences, if you take the for example, apply for oral, they will still give you a poster, but they give you DOI, they will publish it in their electronic portfolio, for example. It's just like I'm trying to, find what I can add and contribute to it. And also, it's the first question. And second question is whether you can build your project based on your previous project, which wasn't fully published, for example, but you have access to the data, you have some CAT and, RHA approval and stuff, HRA approval and stuff like that. So whether this would be more attractive for the team because you have to do kind of less and ethical approval is in place, for example, would that be something, beneficial, please?
would it be okay to start with you again, Liz, about the publications?
Yes, so it's all very dependent on your experience and kind of where you are. So there might be, in the past, we've had some doctoral fellowship applicants that have maybe not had any publications, or maybe just a kind of a small amount, whereas then you might have some doctoral applicants that have loads of publications. So it's always very dependent on kind of the experience that you've had already. And obviously, when you're kind of filling out the application form, you'll be able to kind of detail the experience that you've had, and the selection committee members should be able to kind of assess from that kind of where you are in your career, and kind of then marry that up with the number of publications that that they expect you to have, should I say. I don't know if Richard, do you want to kind of elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard for us to give a kind of black and white figure about the number of publications we're expecting, and it depends on the level. At doctoral level, I hear concerns from a lot of potential applicants that they don't have any publications, or very few, and they don't know if that's a good thing or not. I mean, there will be a variety of CVs in front of the panel from doctoral applicants, and of course there will be some doctoral applicants with no publications or very few previous publications. I always tell people to kind of make the most of what they have and try and include as much as they can in CV sections. In the section on publications, there's no limit to what you can put into the application form. And if you have a poster with a DOI number, well, you could put it in. I mean, the panel can open it up and access it and make their own judgment about the relevance of that, and you may make a case why that is relevant and important. So I think it's a good thing to try and include as much as you can in the CV sections and be creative. Also, if you don't have papers, try to write a narrative about your research background that shows what you have achieved and what you will achieve. So all of that is good. I don't know if we want to move to the second question that you had, or
yes, please. Yeah, that was really around sort of funding for continuing research, wasn't it? Do you want to comment on that first, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's again difficult sort of to talk about specific cases, but in general, the NIHR are looking for value for money, and if there are ways that you can demonstrate that a project is going to be slightly more efficiently run or easier to run, it's going to be more value for money. In terms of applying for ethics, well, I mean, you would normally apply for ethics for the project you're proposing after you've got the funding. So you couldn't really avoid the step of applying for ethics in particular for your fellowship project, but it might be that there was some approvals process at an earlier stage that you had successfully gone through that would save you time, or some people are often sharing data sets and they may have already made agreements with people to share data, which can save some time. Those sorts of things that you can demonstrate would add value for money might be interesting for NIHR to hear and for you to show.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. I can't see any
Thank
more.
you so much.
Thanks, Marina. I can't see any more hands raised in the list of attendees. Catherine, can I ask you if we've majorly missed any questions in the chat as well? I can see a lot have been answered now. Have we done quite well with those?
A few sort of more logistical ones, and as always happens in these things, everyone's helping each other out, which is always lovely to see. So I think we're kind of good, but what I'll do is I'll do a double check, and if we haven't picked up on anything, we can email you afterwards with responses.
Great. Yeah, I can see there's been a few questions around when we'll get slides and the recording, and we'll do that as soon as we can. It'll be a few days, but certainly by early next week you should have a copy. We are coming up to time. It's about 3 minutes to 1. So in the absence of further questions, I'm going to thank all of today's speakers and for everyone who's attended for their engagement with the session. It's been a really good one. There is another session tomorrow on the postdoc awards, on the advanced and DSC awards. So if that's an area of interest as well, come along tomorrow. Otherwise, yeah, just thanks very much everyone for their participation today, and have a good afternoon. Thanks for joining.